This is a 2-post, 10,000 pound capacity floor plate lift. So this, one of the posts is still currently on the truck. What he's doing right now is prepping the cables. So you'll see he's grabbing the cable. He's gonna be sliding it through this slot right here. So there's 2 different sides on the cable, the shorter side and the longer threaded side. The shorter side will go through the top left side of the cage. That is a locking nut. He's gonna feed it all the way through the bottom. You have about maybe 4 or 5 threads showing on there. Just make sure that's fully tightened. Again, that is fed. That's the shorter threaded side. That is fed through the top left of this cage. This is a push pin, so you just pop the pin out, take the wheel out. We're gonna have to grease that up a bit, as you'll see it. This is the longer threaded side. That is also fed through the inside of the cage. Again, a push pin. Release the dial. We're going to be greasing that up as well, but just prepping the cable. Just a little lubricant on the inside of the wheel. That's the mounting bracket. And then you have the pin to lock it in place. And we do the same thing, we repeat. We're going to be doing the same exact thing on this other post. You feed the shorter threaded end through this hole on the cage. Again, this is a shorter thread. Make sure you have that fully tight. Pull the cable through. There's a push pin. Pop the wheel. Make sure you grease that up. And we're also going to grease the wheel on the back end. make sure you put the washer back and pop the push pin in. The longer threaded side will be fed back through the bottom of the cage. There is no hole for that one to be pushed through, so that one just slides through the inside of the cage as you're seeing him doing right now. He already took out the right here. And now you have one post ready to be put up, second post ready to be put up. So I'm going to walk you through how they brought the center line to be able to install this 2-post squared. So the customer wants the 2 posts centered from these 2 posts right here, the 2 blue posts, and centered from the back wall to the front of the post. So what they did is they took the dimensions from the inside post to the inside post, which was approximately 180 inches. The 2 posts is approximately 135 inches wide. So what they did is they took the difference, which led them to have 22.5 inches from the inside here and 22.5 inches from this side. That's approximately where those 2 posts, the outside of those 2 posts will sit. So what they then did is they made a mark here. They measured 22.5 inches from here, from the inside post. They made a mark. They measured from the wall to that mark and then remeasured the wall there to the center. They took the dimensions of this back wall to the inside of this post. They put a center mark, and then they grabbed that wall measurement and brought out that line and marked it. Once they had that dimension here, they measured out 135 inches, made another mark on the floor. And as you can kind of see in this video, they had the 2 marks and they slapped the chalk line on the floor. That gives them a perfectly centered starting point. Now they have an approximate marking of where the outside of the 2 posts is going to sit, edge to edge, and now they're going to bring in the post and pop it up. We're being careful. This customer just did new epoxy floors. These posts look heavy, but with a little leverage, 2 guys can easily pop it up, as you can see. As you can see, they perfectly lined up the edge of the floor plate to the back end of that chalk line. Now that they brought the second post in line, they're not going to position it exactly where it needs to be. They're going to bring it a little bit closer just to give them a little bit more slack on the lines and make it easier for them to bring up the lines into position on the second post. So let's get... They're going to lift up the cage into the first locking position to give them a little bit of access underneath to pull these cables through. The cables that were previously ran, you're going to see that they're opposite. Going opposite line. Opposite line. So they're each going to feed the cables to the corresponding wheel. This is the inside post, since that is the inside of the drive up. What he's doing is taking off the push pin, taking off the wheel. That way he can feed this cable through, put the push pin back on, lock that cable in place. That's being fed on the inside of this cage. And he's passing the cable underneath the wheel. And his partner is going to hold this Once he puts the bracket back in, the push pin back in. It's important to note that this bracket has an L shape. Make sure that the L is standing up and backwards against the post. As you can see right there. Making sure that that holds the cable at the bottom. Push pin from the top down. Let me show you this bracket. This is always going to sit on the floor. Now that we have the cables properly positioned within each wheel, you'll see that they bring out the longer threaded side through the corresponding hole on the top of the cage. That's going to be on both sides. You can see right here, they did the same thing. They brought down the cable back up, put the L bracket, push pin in, fed it through the corresponding slot on the cage, put a bolt. That's going to be tightened up once everything is fully installed on the ground. Right now they're preparing the fittings. They're adding plumber's tape on the bottoms for the thread line. As you'll notice, you have slightly different dimensions. On these are the shorter ones. That is for your hydraulic fluid line. So one goes there, one goes on the opposite side, right here. This customer wanted the motor on the right side, so it's very important to note the right side post will always have the mounting bracket, and the right side post will have two fittings. The longer fitting, which on this piston, it's gonna have a cap. So all you do is have to twist this piston around, and the cap, you're gonna have to remove it and then turn the piston back outwards to face the outside of the post. These are just fittings that you can install with a 3/4 wrench. The back end, as you can see here, this is the longer fitting that you will find in your box, installed on the back side of that piston. You might need to pull this chain up a little bit to give you access to it. But again, those fittings are tightened up with a 3/4 socket. Right side will have two fittings. The side without the motor, that one you don't have to take the plug that's attached to the back end of the piston. You just put the front fitting here. This is your hydraulic fluid line that they're installing right now. Connecting it to the fitting that they previously installed. So now that they have two fittings on the mounting side, one fitting on the opposite side, they're going to bring the shorter hydraulic line that attaches to the longest fitting you have in the box. Again, you might need to pull this chain in order to give you better access to be able to thread this line to it. Make sure it goes in and then hand tighten again. Don't over tighten it. Once it's getting a little bit tight, make sure it's perpendicular going upwards, because this is going to mount to the motor. Again, notate that they didn't put the right side in position. That way they have some slack on the lines and makes it easier for them to work with. Now that they have both cables correctly ran through each post, they have the fittings, they have the hydraulic fluid lines in place. Now they're going to bring it over into the previously marked chalk lines. These These posts are going to be bottom heavy, so positioning it's not going to be too hard. But it is important that you make sure that you have it perfectly aligned to the chalk line that you made in the beginning. As you can see, these are perfectly dimensioned out to be the exact size of this floor plate. So once you pull them tight, all the cables, there won't be any slack on the cables. That floor plate is the exact dimension, so once they put that on, then they can bring this and butt it up right up to it. So now that they have the width correct, then they can come back and make sure that these are in line with the chalk line. That way they know that this is squared away to the proper dimensions of the bay. This floor is pretty level, so having the post level is not going to be too big of an issue. But in case there is a slight imbalance, the installers will have shims to put underneath the base plate, and that'll help them making sure that this is perpendicular. So these bolts measure 5.5 inches. So what you can do is fully inserted, you can measure the top of this screw and it'll show you exactly the depth of this. So this one is about an inch showing, so this customer has about 4 inches of depth, which it's fine. There's not going to be any issues with installing. One thing to note, you're going to have 6 bolts on each of the posts. He already drilled it. You'll see that these bolts are, again, they're 5.5 inches. All you got to do is hammer it in. Once it's fully at the bottom, you'll see once you're tightening it, it'll show you how much depth because the amount of threads that are showing up. That's it. One way to gauge your depth. One thing to note, if you do not have sufficient PSI in your concrete, when you come back and you tighten these nuts down, these locking nuts, the entire screw will pop up because the concrete doesn't have enough PSI to hold this anchor in the bottom. If that happens, you're gonna have to re-pour concrete, but for this customer, the concrete is sufficient, and you'll see that they'll finish hammering these in, drill all 6 holes on the left side, hammer those bolts in. While he's finishing up drilling the rest of the holes on the base plate, we're gonna have him mounting the motor. The bolts are gonna go from the inside out. You're gonna have a washer, a locking nut, split nut, and a bolt. So we're gonna mount it in position. This is a 220, so this is gonna be hardwired up to the top. So right now they're putting the arms in place. As I mentioned, we are in the front side of the lift. You're gonna have 2 sizes on the arms. You have the longer dimension, which are gonna sit on the front side of the post. So you can see they have these pins that they pulled out. Once you have it in place, you slide the pin back in. So these are the longer arms. The shorter arms will be on the farthest end, the inside of the lift. In order to move this, all you do is pull this pin out. It allows you to pivot this arm, as you'll see right here. Make sure that's all the way down. So to move it, pull this pin, swing the arm, that locks it into position. So I will walk you through it. What you're gonna need to do now is make sure you have the longer arms positioned perpendicular. to the post. This is going to allow you to see how much you either have to shim up the base plates on the post, because you can see right here, this is not level. So this side is going to have to be propped up a little bit to make sure that is level to the ground, and these will always be level to each other when we're done. Same thing on the back arms. So what they're going to use here is these shims. These will be inserted by need of where you need to level this arms up. So since this arm is a little bit lower, he's going to put these most likely in the front and the back. Right now they're going to be filling up the motor with the hydraulic fluid. So now you can see it's pretty close to being level, but this post needs to be popped up just a little bit outward. That way you see that arm level up as well. So this gives them a starting point, but this dimensions, or that level gauge, is going to measure out these arms. These bolts haven't been fully tightened down. That way they can be able to shim these up, get it into position where everything is level, and then you tighten these bolts down. So that is important to notate. Do not tighten these bolts until this is perfectly level. Based on the level on the post, he's going to bring this post perfectly level to the ground, tighten this up, and then we can move to the right side. Make sure you measure both on the outside of the post and on these corner slots. Simple crowbar or extended rod will help you lift and be able to shim these up. So see, these are U-shaped, so where he's putting them is in line with the bolts. Position. So now that it's level and he has the shims in place, he's going to be tightening it down in progression to where it's needed to make sure that this stays level. So we have the top and the back tightened. Top left corner is now tightened. Dead centered. So now that we have this post perfectly level, now we can move over to the opposite post and start working in order to bring this lined up. It's already a little bit better than it was before, so you can see here. But now we'll just finish it off by doing the exact same thing, putting those U-shaped shims in line with these. So a little trick in order to be able to tighten these bolts, he has vices attached to the bottom. Now we're just going to tighten it up so it doesn't move. This is the last step to the install on the cables. Just make sure that is fully tight. So you'll be doing the same thing on this side. You're going to grab that part to hold it in place and then come back in and tighten that up right there. He finished tightening all the bolts down. As you can see, this is perfectly level, so there's going to be no issues when loading the cars. So once these are mid-level, the opposite arms will naturally be level as well. And that is pretty much done on the install of a 2-post. Again, this is a 2-post, 10,000 pound capacity floor plate. This is wired for 220, but before we leave, we always like to test out the lift, make sure it's running properly. This is just one way that they test it out. We obviously can't recommend this, but this is a standard extension cable. This is 110, so it's just going to serve to be able to run the motor, lift up and drop. But before you use it, you're loading cars, you do have to wire it to the corresponding current, which on this is 220. But again, this is just to test it out, making sure that it does run. You just have your hot, neutral, and ground cable inserted. So we're gonna run it. So now that we have it lifted and you have it unlocked, you're gonna have to come to both sides on this model. He's gonna move that and disengage the brake. So you disengage the brake by pulling this knob here. And now it's just releasing pressure and it's dropping down. So everything looks to be in working order. And that is the final steps. Obviously, if you have 220, the electrician can hardwire it. You'll be able to run it right off the start without having to do this. But that is it for installing the Halo Lift 2-post 10,000 pound capacity floor plate model.